Hey listeners, I'm Karen Riley-Jeffers, NCSM's Eastern 2 Director. Welcome to our series, Learning with Leaders, Everyone Belongs in Mathematics. Thank you for joining me and my co-host Abel Maestas, the host of Teaching That Counts, as we talk with both leaders and influencers about their math journeys and contributions. Today, we will hear from our special guests about their inspiration, perceptions, and insights regarding instructional decisions that make the mathematics space welcoming and engaging to all. Listen and learn about how beliefs, practices, and policies must continue to advance to ensure that each and every person feels a sense of belonging in mathematics.
All right, well, welcome everybody to the NCSM Learning with Leaders podcast. I'm Abel Maestas and
Karen Riley-Jeffers.
and we are here with a wonderful guest for our second podcast in our Everyone Belongs in Mathematics series. And our guest today is RunningHorse Livingston. So welcome, RunningHorse, to our podcast. So excited to have you and see you again. You were with us in our regional NCTM conference in Seattle. So it's awesome to be here with you again. So just a little bit about RunningHorse. RunningHorse is the founder and CEO of Mathematize Inc. Their mission is to promote education and educational related opportunities for Native people. RunningHorse, he's a nationally recognized educator and consultant. He's been spending about more than 13 years helping teachers across the country making sense of their roles in the age of Common Core standards and making schools more constructive places for our Native American children. So it is wonderful to have you here. I'm just super excited to talk to you today.
I am too. Thank you again for being with us today. But before we begin, I know Abel just introduced you, but if you'll share some of your journey in education that has led you to your current work.
Sure. Yeah, gosh, it's been a long ride. It's been a long 20 years in math education, but it's been an enjoyable 20 years. I don't know that anybody as an elementary student says, I want to be a math educator. At least I didn't. My background is engineering and architecture, but when I fell into education, it was something that I was doing all along. I was a tutor all through college. I worked for our local American Indian Science and Engineering Society. We had camps in the summer, so I did a lot of youth camps as a chaperone, as a director, and so that's where my original love for math education sort of grew from. As a student, of course, I did enjoy math. As I said, it was not something that I felt was going to be a career because I had other aspirations. But I was good at math, and that led me to seek a lot of the work that I did as an undergrad, and then as a graduate student, it was sort of my go-to. I really, when I moved away from engineering and architecture, I landed in education. It was something that I really loved. I loved helping people understand the harmony and the beauty of mathematics, and that it's sort of the language of a lot of other fields, including science. And it fit with what I experienced as a student, what I enjoyed as a learner, and I really wanted to help other people have that kind of enjoyment in their experience. And when I realized that people who look like me and have the same experience as I did as an Indigenous person and as a person of color, I was a little disappointed in that, of course. And I think as BIPOC community members, we want to lift each other up, and I feel like that's has been my goal for the last 20 years as a business owner, as a consultant, as an instructional coach. I really wanted to make sure that children in our communities, in our schools, were being lifted in mathematics, and I feel like there are a number of reasons for that, which we'll get into in this podcast. But certainly that was the the motivating factor for me, both as a learner and now as a professional.
Nice.
Yeah, same feelings in I think Karen can agree, just those same feelings about not seeing as many people that look like me, and at least where I grew up, being math teachers. Jaime Escalante was the one that came to mind when I was growing up. I want to be that guy. I want to be that guy.
We all wanted to be Jaime.
Right. um, and that goes as to our question of our series. So our series is titled "Everyone Belongs in Mathematics." So our leading question to all of our guests is, what does it mean to belong in mathematics?
Yeah, this is a great question, and this one's actually easy for me. As an Indigenous person, I feel like community and belonging is at the heart of our identity as Indigenous people. Having the luxury of traveling around the country the last 20 years and working in different communities, Indigenous communities, reservation communities, urban communities, all of the differences that we have as tribal people, as Indigenous people, there are commonalities across our cultures. And one of those is community. Another is kinship. And so I think those values, it can't be just coincidence that we all value this idea of belonging, that we all honor individuality, but we prioritize the well-being of the group first. And I think that's it's a really beautiful thing. And it's one thing about my culture that I really appreciate. Having grown up with my grandparents, I feel like that those cultural aspects of Indigenous culture were really embedded in who I am as an Indigenous person. And of course, as a math teacher, it's hard to get away from who you are as a math teacher just because you teach math. So I feel like those values as an Indigenous person of community and kinship really come out in the way that I instruct mathematics. So to me, it's natural. It feels natural to be inclusive. It feels like if children don't feel like they belong in mathematics, there's something wrong with that. There's just something innately wrong with children who sit in classrooms, or students who sit in classrooms and don't feel good about it, don't feel like they belong there, or they don't feel like they can achieve in mathematics. I think that's probably one of the saddest stories that when I travel to different schools that I hear or that I see, that I witness, is, children who don't have that math identity or that math agency is really kind of it keeps me going, right? It's that motivating factor, like I said, to help kids who look like us have similar experiences and really enjoy mathematics for what it is.
I love what you said about prioritizing the well-being of the group first, and then that emphasis on kinship and community. So can you speak more about how that drives your work around Native American pedagogy? So first, I should say, if you can explain what that is, and then talk a little bit more about what ways teachers and leaders can integrate aspects of that for their students.
Sure. Yeah, I relate it to mathematics, of course. I think in math education, when we started to really focus on process standards, that was a revelation in our field, because it was like, wait a minute, aren't we just thinking about what we're teaching? When did we start thinking about how we're teaching this content? So when NCTM rolled out process standards, for those of us that were really thinking about delivery and the way that we teach mathematics being just as important, if not more important sometimes than the content standards, that was a really exciting time, because it meant that there wasn't just things that you had to teach. There was a way that was appropriate also for you to teach. There were ways that were inclusive and engaged more kids in the process of learning mathematics. And I think as math teachers, sometimes we sort of get lost in this idea that we teach math and we don't teach kids. And I think in my experience, what I've learned, especially being on the elementary side of K-12, is that we teach kids first. Math is the thing that we teach them. And if we're not conscious of the way that we do that, it makes our jobs that much more difficult and their experience oftentimes much harder. And because of that, I really started thinking about my culture as an Indigenous person. And I thought, well, if education, specifically in math, there's what you teach and how you teach, then the same must be true about culture, that you can teach about culture and you can also teach culturally. And so that for me was a big, like, in my career, it was a big revelation, because I had never thought of it that way. I just thought, as an Indigenous person, like I teach math the way everybody else teaches math, until I saw how everybody else taught math. And I was like, maybe there is something a little unique about the way that I teach it. But I feel like as teachers, especially when every teacher has had that experience where you step into the classroom the first time, and all of that theory you read about in college, and all the methodology and the pre-service experience that you do doesn't really prepare you for that moment fully, right? The rest of it is just kind of, you learn as you go, and you put tools in your toolkit as you gather more of those. And so I really felt like distinguishing my methods as an Indigenous person really was inspired by when process standards came out. And so that really led me to think about the way that we teach, especially in tribal schools and schools that serve large populations of Indigenous students. I really tried to apply that idea that pedagogy and content are these two separate things. They go hand in hand, of course, but if you come from a culture like mine, which is the simple way to say it is that we have a very complex history as people of color. For Indigenous people, we have a history of oppression, a history of assimilation, and we don't have a great relationship with the United States government. And so there's this sort of innate resistance to compliance, and all of these deep culture aspects of Indigenous identity that, if we're not catering to those, then it's harder to reach those students. And so I've realized over the years that the way that I teach is often inclusive of those cultural values, and that there is a recipe, a pedagogical recipe, that when you're teaching students of color, when you're teaching Indigenous students, that really kind of bring out that experience that is meaningful but rigorous and relevant, and it makes retention of concepts so much longer and lasting. I also think that Indigenous pedagogy is really just, it's human pedagogy. We just happen to preserve it, right, because we preserved our culture for millennia. And so when I read research that comes out in math education, I kind of chuckle to myself, because I feel like in our culture, I recognize those things, right? So when you talk about growth mindset, when you talk about differentiation, all of those sort of big movements in education felt familiar, because it was like, yeah, well, we do that in indigenous culture. We do that. So I was really excited when people like Dr. Gutierrez out of University of Illinois wrote the Rehumanizing Mathematics piece for NCTM back in 2018. I was like, yes, yes, somebody's saying it. Now say it for the people in the back. Right, too. And so it was really reaffirming for me, because, this notion that for Indigenous people, especially, this idea of community and orality and holistic connectedness, collaboration, those aren't 21st century skills. Those are things that have existed in our cultures for a very long time. We're just now putting English words on them and an American sort of flavor on those ideas as methodology, but they've been around for forever. So that's what I consider indigenous pedagogy to be.
Wow, that's wonderful. I love the idea of connecting those math, those process standards, the standards for math practice to culture.
Absolutely.
I never really thought about it that way. And here's a quick anecdote for you. I was one of the things that brought me really into teaching when I was in college. I was able to spend 2 summers at the Navajo Indian Reservation teaching math at the community college in Shiprock, New Mexico.
Okay.
And I remember all of those things that we were able to experience. And when I was at Cal Poly, one of the things that the motto of Cal Poly was learn by doing. And so I've taken that in my math teaching throughout my life as learn by doing. People have to do math. People have to communicate math, to talk about math. And maybe that's just because that connected to the cultural experiences that I was experiencing throughout my life and throughout those experiences in the places I've been. I never thought about connecting those things until just right now. So I really appreciate that connection. So I was on your website because I love to take a look at all the things that our guests are doing too. And it was Mathematize Inc. I believe that's your website, correct? And I found something really, truly interesting that I just had to ask you about because I was like, what is that? That's really cool. And it's called wigwometry. Did I say it right?
That's all right.
So can you describe what wigwometry is for our listeners? And then that way they can go to your site and check it out. And then really, how has it impacted some students and their math identities, which you talked about earlier?
Absolutely. First, let me say, Abel, throwing down math in Navajo country. That's awesome.
Yep.
Oh man, I tell you those Navajo tacos. I miss them every day.
Yeah.
Fried bread.
That's awesome. Yeah, wigwometry. Gosh, I wrote that actually it was a curriculum part of my master's thesis when I was going through the University of Minnesota, and it was really tying together some methodologies that we were researching and writing about in my master's program, and we were very much focused on curriculum theory and design in that program. That was the emphasis of the program. So, of course, being a math person, I really wanted to, for me, have that portion of my education experience matter in a way that I knew would be a part of my professional experience, which I think we all kind of do in our graduate experiences. But for me, I remember somebody challenging me at the time and saying, "Well, but why math?" Right? That was always the question to me in my circle, was like, "Why? How did you get involved in math?" And I don't know that I could ever really explain it. Like there was really no good answer for it. It was just like, I don't know. I find it interesting. I like it. And so, we as mathematicians, we always say math is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when we sort of have to put our money where our mouth is. We have, well, give me an example, right? And so this was one of those times when a professor of mine asked me that question. Well, when you say that, what does that mean? If you know that there are disparities in math achievement in our country, but you're saying that math is everywhere, then shouldn't more people be proficient in that language? And it really kind of hit me, and I was like, well, yes, I can prove it to you. Let's take our culture, for example. As an indigenous person, we're sort of used to this idea that, even though it's not true, that when you do culturally responsive, quote unquote, culturally responsive mathematics, you sort of take a math idea and you sprinkle culture on it, and you say, oh, this is how indigenous people thought about this math concept. When in reality, the idea that math and science didn't exist in our culture it's false. It's simply false. When you look at the complexity of indigenous culture, world cultures prior to influence by colonization, there's a ton of very complex math and science. And I wanted to prove that notion by looking at one of our structures in Ojibwe culture. It's a hemisphere. It's a dome-shaped structure that we used in our culture historically because you could build it easily. You could use materials that were renewable. You maximized area and volume inside of the structure. And it was all based on circles. So you had to know something about complex geometry to know that this structure worked really well for conducting heat inside, for maximizing the use of materials and limiting waste. So, it for me, it was taking that challenge of, well, really, how does math fit into culture, right? How does math, how did it exist in indigenous culture before we taught you the word math? And so that was kind of my attempt to, for other people who don't know, show them that math was around before we called it math. We just didn't call it by that name. And so looking at the concepts of circles, looking at arc length, looking at central angles, looking at circumference, volume, all of those concepts are learned by building that structure. And the structure itself is actually pretty complicated. And I know this because I have now done this project with many, many different school districts in many, many different classrooms. And it's funny that a lot of indigenous kids just have, whether they're Navajo, whether they're Ojibwe, whether they're Seminole, they find building the structure fairly easy. But when I work with non-indigenous, usually teachers, or they really struggle with putting, like applying the mathematics. So they're trying to do the math first and then trying to build this structure. And, it's the irony in that process is, it's Alanis Morissette level irony. Not describe it. Yeah. So that's wigwametry.
That's amazing. I am learning so much right now. I was not exposed to indigenous cultures growing up or to learning about them beyond, what was in our textbooks, which wasn't necessarily, well, we know history. So,
Yeah.
so I appreciate this moment so much regarding everything that you're saying. And it really resonated with me about how there's nothing new under the sun. Like this was always here. It's not brand new.
Yes.
It's not brand new. It's been a part of us. But last year, there's an article in which you said that mathematics is a civil right. And I know there's another, Bob Moses has also said that mathematics is a civil right. But what led you to say that it's a civil right? It's such a powerful statement that has resonated with us. And I can say that in this battle of like math and literacy that I'm constantly in, where literacy tends to overpower mathematics,
Right.
like I carry that protest sign and I'm just like, well, math is a civil right too, you know?
Yes.
So, can you elaborate on how mathematics education is so important in building equity, and then a little more about what that statement means to you?
Sure. Yeah. And Bob was the first one that said that. I took that quote from a workshop at NCSM conference. But it obviously resonated with me as an Indigenous person and as a person whose family was very much activists full time. We were everything else part time, but activists full time. So growing up in a family that you carried protest signs from a very young age, you start to question those things, right? When you say normal or when you say status quo, you question that because not everything is as it appears. And so when I heard that quote, mathematics is a civil right, at first I was like, that's a little like over the top in my mind, but I was young. I was young. I was a young educator when I heard that. And over the years, as I really started doing research and looking at the disparities in math achievement and education in our country, I was like, oh man, maybe there is something to this quote. Maybe it is a civil right. And then when I started traveling back in the early 2000s with a friend of mine who's a great mathematician, great math educator out of the University of Wisconsin. He's a chair now, John Coker. Our favorite definition of problem solving, which we believed, because we would travel the country and train groups of teachers as a team, and we would always talk about this idea of problem solving because it was one of the process standards, right? That was one of those original process standards. And so we landed on this definition that problem solving is what you do when you don't know what to do. And that really stuck with me. Like I still say that. I just said that today in a workshop. So it's what you do when you don't know what to do. When you think of mathematics that way, it becomes this thing that is actually a life skill. So that little 60-minute window of the day that you call math time is actually a really important time because you're teaching young people this skill of being able to trust their minds to resolve something, right? To resolve a problem. And we know as people of color, we don't just have math problems. There's other kinds of problems. And we know this because when you're in schools, our children bring not just a diverse culture, but they bring that set of diverse problems and challenges that they face every day. And so if we don't help them build this ability to trust their minds to figure something out, right? Whether it's a math problem or whether it's a problem with friends or a problem with their family or a problem in their station in life, whatever it is, when human beings lack the ability to problem solve, we mimic, we copy what we see other people do. That's our way that's sort of the default mode for human problem solving. And so if you think about math that way, it really is a civil right, because it's this ability to trust in yourself as a critical thinker, that you can, when you're faced with a challenge, that you can overcome that challenge. You can take steps to get there, even if you can't solve it right away. Maybe it's something that takes a little more time and a little more dedication and a little more work to resolve, but you trust that you're going to get there. And I'm not as an Indigenous person, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but Indigenous people know full well the intent that government-based education can have on a group of people when the people behind that education want something. So I think that math is definitely a civil right. So that statement by Bob Moses rings more true every year that I do what I do, and I work with teachers and students in math education, and I suspect that belief will get stronger as many years as I am lucky to be in this field.
Man, Karen, so true, right? Like I saw you just like you're like, keep talking.
So I'm a churchgoer. That's part of my career. And I just felt like raising holy hands because everything you said just spoke to my spirit. And I was
Oh,
just like, oh my gosh, like, yes. Like belonging
yeah.
is getting students to trust in their minds,
Trust in their minds.
to resolve something, and having that ability to be able to trust yourself enough to know that you can work this thing out, even though you can't see it. That's the faith part. Even though you can't see it, but you have that trust and belief in you that you have the skills and the knowledge and the power to do so and be able to see that through. Like there's so much power in that. Thank you.
Hey, you know,
Faith and faith too, right? You have to have
Yeah.
that faith because if you can't see that thing, you have to have faith. And so it involves all of those skills that we don't think of as academic, but we know they are.
And what's completely blowing my mind right now is that connecting mathematics to culture, but you just also connected mathematics to social emotional learning, in that like that's what math is and can be for people, is the ability to resolve situations,
Mhm.
whether it is
Justice.
solving a problem that's scientific or solving a problem that is emotional. That they're to be able to trust in your own thinking, to be able to do that instead of mimicking, which that's probably part of the reason why, that might be a reason why we tend to fall into the wrong paths, is because we're mimicking something that we saw somebody else do.
Mhm.
Um, whoa, I'm just like, my mind's blown. Karen's, and here I thought math was just the language of that nature speaks to me with.
No, not at all.
Um, so all of that said, right, we bring it back to having all of our kids feel like they belong in mathematics, because we want them to feel belonging. We want that math identity, so that they can grasp that beauty of mathematics and the problem solving that we want them to have. So, talking to leaders here, right? What can leaders do to support? So just give one tip that leaders can do right now that they can support their teachers, their students, their coaches, all of the people involved, parents, with a sense of belonging in mathematics.
Yeah, this one's easy too. Discourse. Discourse is probably the number one thing that I look for when I step into a classroom that I'm new to, or that I've come back to see, where instruction is, to get a gauge of how that teacher has grown. I always look for the discourse. What's the level of talking? What's the level of debate that students are having in a classroom? Because I come from the days when that was not a part of math learning. Talking was not a part of math learning in my day. In my day, it was a lot of note taking. It was a lot of lecture. It was a lot of I'm guessing what many adult learners remember about their especially high school experience. So discourse, and when I walk into a classroom where there's a lot of talk happening or there's a lot of debate happening. I was in a classroom, a third grade classroom today, where kids were arguing about what 7 times 6 equaled. And one student said it was 38, and the other said it was 42, and they were arguing. They were arguing about who was right. And the teacher apologized for it. And I said, no, no, no. Don't ever apologize for this. This is a good thing, right? This is productive discourse that they're having, and we want to see where do they land after this debate, because kids don't necessarily argue the way that adults do, right?
Mm.
If they realize they're wrong, they're like, they don't care, right? Like as a husband, I will argue till my wife gives me a little bit, like give me a little bit of that right pie. Uh, but kids don't care. Like kids will argue a conviction, but if that conviction is actually 42 and not 38, they don't care. Oh yeah. I just missed that number. I missed, So when I see high levels of discourse in a classroom, if you can get kids to talk, it means you've gotten kids to take risks, right? If you can get them to express a mathematical idea or a mathematical conjecture, it means that they've gotten over this uh, barrier or this challenge or this fear that if they say something in class and they might be wrong, that they're going to be embarrassed or that So if I see kids talking, it means that they've gotten over this risk of being wrong, or this fear of being wrong. If I see them debating, um, that's an even higher level, right? Because now it means you've gotten them to present an argument, and when you present an argument, you usually bring evidence. Or you bring receipts, right? And when you have that, if you can set that up intentionally in a math classroom, you are a master of math teaching, because being able to do that with intent is definitely a skill that even as a math educator myself, I still have to really think deeply about, like, how am I going to set up this lesson so that I can get these two camps of kids to argue that a square is not a rectangle or it is a rectangle. I feel like that piece. If math leaders, there's one thing that you can do in your classrooms or with your building leaders, with your math team leaders, get them to believe in this idea of discourse and getting kids to talk in mathematics. Because if they can get there, then that means they have to figure out a way to do these things, to get over these barriers or challenges that students might be having in their classrooms.
My mind's still blown. Still blown. Still resonating with me, everything that has been said. So like one of my biggest takeaways from all of this is, like, when a child can use their funds of knowledge to work out and solve a problem, that is building the confidence in them to trust their minds in order to resolve something, which goes so much further than just the math classroom, and it really taps into, like, all aspects of their being, and that belonging is innate. And if we're sitting and going into classrooms where students are feeling like they belong, or even us as leaders, if we're in our workplaces and we're with people who feel like they don't belong, something's wrong. Like, something just not right with that. I can't tell you how much I've loved this.
Now, Running Horse, you've given our listeners so much to think about and so much to. I'm gonna have to rest my brain for a few minutes here after I go back. See,
My wheels are going to be spinning around this, because then it's leading me to think about the reasons why, like, open-ended tests are so important, and the reasons why, like, not just giving them the answer and not just telling them the strategy all the time is important, because we're stripping away their independence to be able to build those processes to think and problem solve, that's going to help them later in life beyond the math classroom. So then that leads me to that question: when am I ever going to use this? Were you going to use it every day? Because we're going to be faced with problems every day that we're not going to know how to solve. But because we've had practice solving problems, we know we have the confidence to get through it.
Yeah, and I really, when I was in high school, I'm always leery about talking about struggles, right? Like, because I'm always careful to give fodder for people who like to generalize other groups of people. But my home life, like many others who were in my community, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't the kind of home you see on TV. It wasn't an ideal home. There was dysfunction. Everybody kind of had something that was a part of their life. But for me, it it was one of those problems that I looked at, right? Like my experience in life and um, how I wanted to be different, how I wanted to make that better. I saw it as a math problem, and I thought of it as, okay, the problem is I don't want to be stuck in this cycle of redoing the same things that a lot of community members that I see, a lot of people that I look up to, um, who are fine. And I don't want to give the impression that where I'm from, because I'm very proud of where I come from. I grew up on the Bad River Reservation in northern Wisconsin. I just recently moved back, so that place will always be home. It'll always be special to me because that's where I'm from. That's my identity. Um, but I wanted to see the world. I wanted to see other Native people, other communities, other parts of our country, and I knew that uh, I had to figure out a way to do that. Right, I had to figure out a way to, first of all, uh, not be just another number, not just be another kid who, you know, uh, didn't put in the work or couldn't figure out a problem, couldn't resolve the situation. And so that was my goal all through school. And so I knew that, then it was a long-term thing. I wasn't going to be able to do it overnight. I still had 4 years to go of high school, but I knew what the solution was. I knew the solution was graduating. I knew part of the solution was going to college, and really asserting myself and my identity into a profession that I didn't want to feel like I was working, right? I didn't want to spend a 3-4 decades doing something that felt like work. And for me, it was math education. It was something that I found, and that in a lot of ways found me, and I happened to be really good at, and worked my tail off to get to where I was. I studied, I did research, I put in the hours, many hours in classrooms all over the country, and really tried to learn as much as I could about this field that we all love, and apply those teachings like a math problem, because the ultimate problem is, how do we teach math better? So that for me has been my professional goal for the last 20 years. And I'm not a full resolution yet, but I'm definitely a lot further than where I was 20 years ago. So
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing all your insight on belonging and how we can help our students belong in the math classroom, to give them that confidence that they can solve any problem because they can solve math problems. But before we leave, how can our listeners learn a little bit more about you and your work?
sure, yeah. So I have a couple of different resources. First of all, my website for my business, which is mathematize.org. That's my own personal business that I did a lot of consulting over the last 20 years with. So there's information about how to get a hold of me, uh, what my work consists of, and then also the nonprofit that I work for currently, which is Education Northwest out of Portland. I believe our website is educationnorthwest.org.
All right. Well, thank you, Running Horse, so much for joining us today. Um, yeah, thank you everyone for being here and listening to our podcast with the awesome and amazing Running Horse Livingston.
Absolutely.
Thank you both.
We hope that you have been inspired by this bold mathematics leadership conversation, and will tune in to our podcast series each month. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. You can learn more about NCSM leadership and mathematics education and our upcoming professional learning events on the NCSM website, mathedleadership.com. You can also follow NCSM on the X at MathEdLeaders and using the hashtag NCSMBold. Until next time.